LeighTDickey.com. Well, hello everybody, Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, where I talk about matches, segments, we cover those in watch-alongs, and I give you stories from my fandom, from my own perspective of being a wrestling fan the majority of my life. And I give you opinion pieces like the one I'm going to give you today, why I think ECW One Night Stand was the perfect ending and should have been the perfect ending for ECW, the original ECW as a whole, as a company, as an entity. It was perfect. But before we get into that, before we get into why ECW One Night Stand 2005 was the perfect ending to ECW as a whole, I want to get some housekeeping out of the way. And that means you can find Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and your favorite podcast app. It is everywhere. Go find it, go subscribe, go download. Leave a review and tell me what you think. And tell me what you want me to cover here on Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. And remember, new episodes come out and are released every Monday at midnight Eastern Time. But with that out of the way, let's get into why I think ECW One Night Stand is the perfect ending to ECW and should have been the ending to the original ECW. Alright, here we go. So yes, why ECW One Night Stand 2005 should have been the perfect ending to ECW. It should have been the ending, and it was the perfect ending to ECW. It was a fantastic show. I remember seeing the promotional material, and I myself did not get to see much of the original ECW when it was on TNN, because I didn't see it in syndication all that much. I don't think it aired up here in Canada. So the majority of the ECW original stuff that I did see was on TNN when they were on for that 1 year. And even then, as Paul Heyman has stated, and I think Tommy Dreamer as well, there wasn't much promotional material for the original ECW back when it was on TNN. So getting to catch it was kind of awkward and weird. There wasn't much there. It was kind of hard to peg down a time slot and a day of the week. I remember seeing it at like 9 o'clock one night, and of course I live in the Eastern time zone, so 9 o'clock Eastern time in the evening, and I remember seeing it at like 3:30 coming home from school one day, where I remember seeing, Mike Awesome put Masato Tanaka through a table, I think with a power bomb off the top rope, or an awesome bomb off the top rope through a table. That's like one major original ECW memory that is like etched and burned into my memory. And burned into my mind. That's probably one of the only memories I have, other than like the Impact players, Justin Credible and Lance Storm. I remember seeing a lot of those guys, but that's pretty much it. Like, I don't remember much of the original ECW, so when it comes to this show, ECW One Night Stand 2005, why I think it should have been the ending, and it really is the perfect ending for that company, the original ECW as a whole, it really didn't make sense to launch it again as its own separate brand, in my opinion. But this would have been the perfect ending because you had the Impact players, you had Lance Storm and Jericho on the card, that three-way dance between Tajiri, Super Crazy, and Little Guido. And then there was Rey Mysterio and Psychosis, Mike Awesome versus Masato Tanaka, the Dudley Boys versus Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman. I think the majority of these guys that were on this card, I'm probably missing a couple matches, but the majority of these guys that were on the ECW One Night Stand 2005 card were already under contract to the WWE. So it made sense to have them there. A lot of these ECW originals were under contract already to the WWE. I think Rob Van Dam was under contract because he was at that show. Tommy Dreamer was under contract. The Dudley Boys were under contract. They've been WWE employees for several years. You had Rey Mysterio and Psychosis, Benoit, Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero were already there. They were under contract. I don't think Super Crazy was under contract at this time, or maybe he was. I don't know. I think Little Guido, or Nunzio, as he was known in the WWE, was under contract. And then you had Tajiri, who, again, I think he was still under contract with the WWE. I can't be sure. I'm not all that positive. But a lot of these guys had runs and or were already employed by the WWE by the time this show, by the time ECW One Night Stand 05 had taken place. So, I mean, it was perfect to have this show anyway. I think I had seen in the Untold story of the relaunch of ECW, or WWE Untold episode of the relaunch of ECW, where the germ of the idea for ECW One Night Stand 2005, it came from Rob Van Dam, because you had all those guys there. You had, Rob Van Dam, you had Tommy Dreamer, you had the Dudley Boys, you had Little Nunzio, you had Little Guido, Nunzio, you had Rey Mysterio, you had Psychosis, I don't know whether he was under contract either. He might have just come in for the one shot. But you had all those ECW originals, and the show itself was great. Like, you had Jericho, you had Lance Storm, you had, you didn't have Awesome, or you didn't have Tanaka, but you had Jericho, you had Storm, you had Mysterio, you had Rob Van Dam, Tommy Dreamer, you had the Dudleys, you had all those guys, so it made sense to do like a one night stand, as they say, like a one-off show, and the show was perfect. For me, the match of the night, because I remember seeing the show. I don't think I saw it live. I did see it probably like a week or so later, but the match of the night for me, and the one thing I remembered most of the original ECW, Joey Styles, he was there, and you had like Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka. That for me was match of the night. I think that Mike Awesome was such an underrated big man, and he could move so fluidly in the ring, but he was just so underrated. I don't know what you could really say was his detriment, if he had any, but he was so smooth in the ring, and he was so agile and so athletic for a guy his size. He was so underrated and so underappreciated, in my opinion. It's a shame he's no longer with us, and it's a shame he went out the way he did. But I think this show, and Paul Heyman has said this before, I think he said it in the WWE Untold episode of the relaunch of ECW, where that would have been perfect, because it would have been their, like as he said, this would have been their last chance to experience each other, and it would have been a perfect ending if you just said, okay, we finally reached the finish line. Yes, it's under the WWE banner, but they're letting Paul basically run the show and come up with the creative and what have you, and put this thing together. It's got WWE money, and the narrative goes, Vince was a fan of the original ECW and is still a fan, I assume, to this day, but he was a fan then, and everybody was clamoring for it because you had all the originals there, you had all the pieces in place, and it just seemed perfect. So why not just have the show? And they did. The only drawback, in my opinion, was where like Eddie Guerrero allegedly phoned it in. Like, Guerrero and Benoit, that is a match made in heaven. That's perfect. That is a wrestling fan's dream. That is a dream match. And I'm sure they had their, matches in WCW and in ECW and wherever else they worked. Maybe even in Japan. I'm not sure whether they worked together in Japan or wherever else. Or Mexico, but like, these guys were perfect. They complemented each other so well because they knew each other so well. The only thing I could say, okay, so Guerrero allegedly phoned in that match because I think the crowd was so preoccupied with the Raw and SmackDown contingent in the balcony at the Hammerstein Ballroom. So, I mean, if that were me, yeah, I'd get ticked off too, because here I am busting my butt for you and you're not even paying attention to the match. And it sucks. Like, I know the ECW audience and the ECW crowd is bloodthirsty, but they also love good wrestling, and they'll just sort of they can turn on a dime if they want to. And it seems that within the Guerrero-Benoit match, because of the Raw and SmackDown contingent in the balcony, that's what they did. They just kind of turned and decided we're going to pay more attention to them than what's going on in the ring, which is unfortunate because, like, had they gone all out, I think that would have stolen the show. Just those two names on paper, with their wrestling ability alone, could burn the house down. They could tear the roof off anywhere, off any arena in any part of the world, and I'm sure they did that on previous occasions, but here, it just kind of fell flat. It was kind of lopsided and just kind of, it was just kind of there, One of my favorite matches was Jericho versus Lance Storm. They opened the show, and I get, like, it would have been perfect had they just stopped there, because that was a fantastic show. You had that three-way with Super Crazy, Little Guido, Tajiri. You had all these originals involved, like the Sinister Minister, Mikey Whipwreck, Sabu, Rob Van Dam. It was fantastic. You know what I mean? Dudley Boys, and I think Beulah got involved in the main event of the show, because it was Sandman and Tommy Dreamer versus the Dudley Boys. And I remember seeing Beulah come out, and of course, Beulah and Tommy Dreamer are married in real life, and they have kids. So, like, that was fantastic, to see her get involved. Bill Alfonso was there. You had Joey Styles and Mick Foley on commentary. That was perfect. A perfect cap. You could have just stopped right there. But because I think after the show, and the fans were still really, really hot for it, so I'm assuming that show did well in terms of, like, pay-per-view buys and what have you, and, like, the post-show buzz. Like, it was everywhere. I didn't, hear much about it until I started seeing the promotional material on, like, WWE TV, whether it was Raw or SmackDown at the time, or even, like, their syndicated shows like Velocity or Heat. I didn't remember hearing about it until probably, like, I started seeing the promotional material. I remember some buddies and I back in high school, we were talking about it, and that might have been the first time I'd heard about it other than the promotional material, but it was mainly the promotional material that I saw on WWE's television programs that I was like, oh, what's this? I think my first thought was, oh, they're, putting on another pay-per-view. Like, it was, instead of like a Raw or SmackDown branded pay-per-view, it was a ECW pay-per-view. And I thought that was, at first I thought that was kind of strange, but then I was like, oh, this could be cool. And lo and behold, it was. It was a cool pay-per-view. It was awesome. I loved the show. I loved seeing it. Joey Styles on commentary, hearing him. He is underrated as a play-by-play guy, in my opinion. He was underrated. I'm not sure if Taz was on the show. I'm sure he was. Probably in that skirmish at the end between the ECW originals and the Raw and SmackDown contingent. I think Paul Heyman's promo from this show on the Raw and SmackDown contingent, I think it was about halfway through the show that he came out, and to a massive pop, the crowd just thank you, Paul, for minutes on end. But when he cut that promo on the Raw and SmackDown contingent, that's one of my favorite promos of all time. And it was just perfect. However, the following year, we got another ECW One Night Stand. Now, if they wanted to do ECW branded shows, ECW One Night Stands, just as a standalone, like once a year or once every couple years pay-per-view, or even you could do it as a network special now. You own the name. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Like, if you did that once a year or once every couple of years just to bring everybody back and have a feel-good moment, that would be perfect, right? That is fantastic. That's how it should be, but we didn't get that. after ECW One Night Stand 2006, I really don't have much to say about that show other than like Edge and RVD for the title, I'm sorry, not Edge and RVD. Edge interfered in that match. It was Edge and John Cena for the title, and well, we all know what happened there. ECW goes on Sci-Fi, and it just turns out to be this hokey, cartoonish mess. I understand that things were under the WWE banner, and you had to basically do everything to fit the mold of your distribution partners at that point, and they still do that with the PG rating and all. And I'm not knocking the rating. I'm just like, it could have been so much better. I understand that, going on Sci-Fi and being under the WWE banner is a much better TV deal than the one they had with TNN when they were the original ECW, and Heyman basically owned it and ran it himself, along with, I guess, Tommy Dreamer at the end. It was just kind of like, well, okay. But the whole ECW on Sci-Fi thing, and I didn't get to see much of that either, because I think, from what I remember, seeing the ECW on Sci-Fi program, it was aired in, like, I live in Canada, so it was aired on Global, I think, at like 2:30 or 3 in the morning on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. I don't know, like, they have a Canadian television deal, the WWE in itself. They have a Canadian television distribution partner that airs Raw and SmackDown and Main Event here now. And they've aired Raw and SmackDown on the same network for probably close to, I don't know, 15 years, maybe something in that ballpark. It's been more than 10, I'll tell you that much. So I don't understand why the network that airs Raw and SmackDown, or at least at the time that aired Raw and SmackDown, wouldn't take the ECW program. If you're going to air everything else on one network, why wouldn't you just air the ECW programming on one network? It just didn't make sense to me. And that's coming from a guy that does have a television background, but I understand like how rights work and how distribution works a little bit better now than I did back in, say, 2005, 2006, because having worked in television for probably, I don't know, close to most of my adult life, I'd probably have to say like almost 10 years now, something like that. But I mean, having it air on a different network at a weird time slot, it just kind of didn't make sense to me. It was much like the ECW on TNN deal, where it was, you couldn't figure out when it aired and what day of the week it aired. But the product of the WWE ECW after ECW One Night Stand 2006, it fell flat. Like, it was cartoonish. It wasn't anything like ECW. And I think Paul Heyman even called it like an abomination, right? It was just, you could have abolished it. If you wanted to developmental territory like you have with NXT, you had the money then to do it. Why not just call it something along the lines of developmental or something? That you didn't have to suddenly like turn the ECW name into what it turned into when it spent the 4 years on Sci-Fi. It just, One Night Stand 05 was perfect because it was like the perfect show. Everybody was happy. The performers were happy. The fans were happy. Obviously, the fans were happy because they ordered the pay-per-view. They were clamoring for it. And I think it was just the perfect ending. And if you wanted to do another One Night Stand like they did for, I think, 06, 07, and 08, even though they got Raw and SmackDown involved in both 2007 and 2008 because of the drafts and what have you, and having the 3 separate brands in ECW, Raw, and SmackDown, if you wanted to just do ECW branded shows, you could just have them happen once every year or once every couple of years. But ECW One Night Stand should have been, One Night Stand 2005, mind you, should have been it. That was the perfect cap. Everybody went home happy, from the performers to the fans, And I'm pretty sure internally, like, everybody was like, holy cow, this is still, like, awesome. There's still something there. And I remember hearing from the Untold relaunch of ECW, that WWE Network episode, where the original idea was to have it as an online-only presentation had they come back full term. But obviously that didn't happen because there was interest, and then it got thrown onto Vince's desk, and then we got ECW on Sci-Fi, and we all know what happened there. But, I mean, even having it as an online-only presentation, why not? That was the beginning of streaming, and people can then watch it on their own time. I mean, you can make it available for a certain amount of time. I mean, TNA did that for a while. I mean, I think that's how they did their first, like, proper monthly pay-per-view with Victory Road 04. That was their, that's how they did it. And that's how they did Impact when they didn't have a TV deal with Spike. I think they were in between TV deals with Fox Sports and Spike at the time. So they aired their weekly television show through their website and through the internet. And it was fantastic. Like, it did well. That was the beginning of streaming. And I suppose WWE, as the market leader, if you will, in terms of, like, sports entertainment, professional wrestling, should have been on top of that. That's just my opinion. But ECW One Night Stand 2005 was the perfect ending, and it should have stopped there. ECW could have gone away into the sunset, gone away happy. Everybody would have been like, that was perfect, great, thank you. We can close the doors. We can close that chapter of wrestling. We can close that chapter on the business at that point. But we got 4 years of ECW on Sci-Fi, and we all know how that ended up. But there it is, why I think ECW One Night Stand 2005 should have been and would have been the perfect ending to ECW as a company as a whole. And of course, I'm talking the original ECW. There it is. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. It is available everywhere. Go find it, go download it, go subscribe, leave a review, and tell me what you would like to hear me talk about on this show, on Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. I want this to be a fan-driven experience, so I tell you what, you tell me what you want me to cover in addition to the things that I want to talk about on this show, and I will cover it. If I can find it, if I can get access to it, I will cover it on this show. If it's wrestling related, I will cover it on this show. So please tell me what you would want me to cover. But thanks again for listening to this new episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, which can be found on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. And of course, we will talk to you all next Monday at midnight Eastern time for a new episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. I am Leigh Dickey, signing off for Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, and LeighTDickey.com. And just a quick reminder, you can subscribe and find the episodes on YouTube by searching Leigh Dickey TV. All those links will be in the description below. You can follow me on social media at LeighTDickey on Twitter and Leigh on Wrestling on Instagram and Facebook. Every link in the description below. Follow me and let's talk wrestling. But thanks again for tuning in. We will talk to you all next Monday. Peace. LeighTDickey.com